We continue now at the top of Daf Samach Beis Amud Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 62a. And the previous summit, the Gemara said, what do we learn from the pasuk of Mizbach Adama? We learned that the Mizbeach cannot be built on top of arches, velo al gabi mechilos, and it cannot be built on top of tunnels. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Lav Hainu Detanya, isn't that what we learned in the following brisa? Rashi explains, Amar Rav Yosef, Lav Hainu Detanya, Rav Yosef Choler, Rav Yosef became ill, V'nekar limudo, he forgot his learning, U'pa'amim sha'amar davar, sometimes he said something, V'nizkar shashana hepech v'chazarbo, and then he remembered that he actually learned the opposite and he retracted. V'hacha hachi amar, so here he's saying as follows, Hechi amrinan la'el, how do we say earlier, Misham eish shel shamayim mesayatan lahutzrachol Yoser, since there was a fire from heaven and it assisted in terms of the consumption of the karbonos, so they did not need the mizbeach to be larger. But how could that be? But again, Lav Hainu Detanya, didn't we learn in a brisa? And Rashi explains, Sha'anshe Knesset HaGadola, Higiu L'sof Midosav, Lahem Nigle Makam HaMakudash L'Mizbeach, that it was actually the Anshe Knesset HaGadola in the second base HaMikdash, they understood the true size of the Mizbeach, Mashalo Nigle L'Shlomo, which was not revealed to Shlomo. Actually, Shlomo had built the Mizbeach too small. That's what Rav Yosef is now saying. Again, Lav Hainu Detanya, isn't that what we learned in the following brisa? The pasuk says in Sefer Ezra, Vayachinu HaMizbeach mechonosav, it says they set the mizbeach upon its base, and it means to say shehigiu l'sof midosav, that they understood what really was the true measurement. But the Gemara continues and asks on this, how can we say that in the second Beis HaMikdash they arrived at the true measurement? On the contrary, but it's written in Divrei Hayomim, Hakol b'chsav miyad Hashem olai hiskil, it was all from Hashem. Rashi explains, "V'haksiv hakol b'chsav shekol mekomos hakedoshos." The pasuk means all of the holy locations umidosein and their measurements nichtavu leDavid. They were written to David HaMelech. Alma b'mikdash rishon nami haydelo asu gadol. You see that in the first Beis HaMikdash also, the reason why the mizbeach wasn't so large, lav mishum delo nigle l'shlomo hamakom b'midosav. It was not because it was not revealed to Shlomo what the true measurement was. That cannot be the explanation. And so the Gemara continues, Elo Amar Rav Yosef. Rather, Rav Yosef says, Kra eshkach v'darash, he found the pasuk and he darshaned as follows. The pasuk says in Divrei Hayomim, Vayomer David Zehu Beis Hashem Hu Elokim V'zem Mizbeach La'ola L'Yisrael. David HaMelech says this is the Beis Hashem and this is the Mizbeach, and we understand that pasuk to mean Ki Bayis, it is like the Beis Hashem, Ma Bayis Shishim Amma, just like the Beis HaMikdash is 60 Amma, Af Mizbeach Shishim Amma, so to the Mizbeach can be up to 60 Amma. And Rashi explains, Elam Rav Yosef Kra Eshkach V'darash. Rather, Rav Yosef says he found the pasuk and he darshaned, meaning Shenamar LeDavid Shishim Amma b'Makom HaMizbeach. It was said to David 60 Amma in terms of the location of the Mizbeach. Ushlomo lo haven ledarsho. Shlomo didn't understand to darshan it that way. V'heim darshu, and they darshaned it in that fashion. V'hosifu olav, and they added upon it lefi hatsorech lehem, according to what they needed. U'leshishim amma lo hutzrachu. They didn't need it to be so large as 60 amos, but they added according to what they needed. De'amrinu lekamon midas arko v'rachvo v'komaso ein ma'akvin, because we're going to say later on that the length, the width, the height, it's not ma'akiv, it's not required that it be exactly that size. And Rashi continues, Ma bayis samechama, just like the bayis was 60 amma k'dichsiv, like it's written in the pasuk, Shishim amma orko, it says it was 60 amma in length. Af mizbeach ad Shishim amma roilo, so to the mizbeach, it could be up to 60 amma. Umekudash hamakom im yirtzu, the area, the location was sanctified if that's what they would want. And the Gemara continues, B'shlam bayis, we understand the Beis HaMikdash, so min karatzura, so it's clear where it was supposed to be built based on what they were able to see in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. Rashi explains, B'shlam bayis yodu anshe Knesset HaGadola, the anshe Knesset HaGadola, when they were building the second Beis HaMikdash, they knew ma kadosh li'azara, what part was holy for the azara, uma kadosh lehechol, what part was holy for the hechol. Shenikarim tzurasu yisodos hachomos, you could see the foundations of the wall. It makes sense of the walls. It makes sense that they would know where to build it. But the Gemara continues and asks, Ela mizbeach, but when it came to building the mizbeach, mino yodi, so from where do they know? How do they know? As Rashi says, mino yodi mekomo hecha, where do they know exactly where the mizbeach was supposed to go? And the Gemara continues, Amar Rebbe Elazar says, Ro Mizbeach Bonoi, they saw the Mizbeach built, Umechal Hasar Hagadol Omed Umakrav Olav, they were able to see Mechal, the great angel, standing and bringing offerings upon it. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar, and Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, Aforo Shal Yitzchak, they saw the ashes of Yitzchak Ro, they saw them, Shemunach Ba'oso Makam, that they were placed in that location, that's how they identified the location. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmeni Amar, and Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmeni says, Mikol Habayis Kulo Heirichu Reach Ketores, from the entire bias, from the area of the Beis HaMikdash, they could smell the smell of the Ketores, the smell of the incense. But Misham, from there, from the location of the Mizbeach, Heirichu Reach Eivarim, they were able to smell the smell of the Eivarim, the burning of the limbs, and that's how they identified the location of the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba bar Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar Barachana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Shlosha Neviim Alu Imoim Min Hagola. There were 3 Neviim that came up with them from the exile. Rashi says that refers to Shlosha Neviim, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. It refers to Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And the 3 Neviim, Echad Shahid Lehem Al Mizbeach, one testified about the Mizbeach. Rashi explains, Echad Hayed Lehem Al Mizbeach, Sheyesh Lo Makam Lahosif Ad Shisha Amma. He said that there was area to add on up until 60 Amma. V'Echad Shahid Lehem Al Makom HaMizbeach, and one testified about the location of the Mizbeach. Rashi says, Heichon Haya, where exactly it was. V'Echad Shahid Lehem, and then one that testified for them that Shemakriv and Afa Bishain Bayis, that we can bring karbonos even if there is no Beis HaMikdash. And Rashi explains, Shemakriv and Afa Bishain Bayis, Tiktushas HaBayis Kitchel Hashaita, V'Kitchel Yasud Lavo, that the holiness of the Beis HaMikdash, it even continues to be holy even into the future after there is no Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara continues, B'masnisa Tana, and the Brisa was taught, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Shalosha Neviim Alu Imoim Min Hagola. There were 3 prophets that came up with them from the exile. Echad Shahid Lehem Al HaMizbeach, one testified to them about the Mizbeach. V'al Mokam HaMizbeach, and on the place of the Mizbeach, about both of those things. V'echad Shahid Lehem Shemakrivin Afa Bishain Bayis, and one that testified that we can bring offerings even without a Beis HaMikdash. V'echad, and one, and the third one, Shahid Lehem Al HaTorah Shetikosev Ashuris. He testified about the Torah that should be written in the Ashuris script. Rashi explains, Shetikosev Ashuris Shemitchilan Nitlo Lehem B'Chsav Ivri Ksav Livna Kidu Amar B'Sanhedrin. Originally, it was in what's called Ksav Ivri, and now it was to be written in Ksav Ashuris. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Keren v'kevesh v'yesod v'ribua, the corners of the Mizbeach, the ramp of the Mizbeach, the base of the Mizbeach, and the fact that the Mizbeach is square, ma'akvin, those are all requirements. Midas arko, midas rochbo, midas komaso, in terms of the measurement of its length, of its width, and of its height, ein ma'akvin, those are not required. If it's not exact, that is not a problem. Rashi explains, V'ribua im ein ha-mizbeach meruba, means to say that if the Mizbeach is not square, again, there's a requirement that the Mizbeach be square. And the Gemara continues, Benohani Mili, from where do we know this? Amar Rav Huna says, Amar Krotz, because the Pasuk says, ha-mizbeach, it says ha-mizbeach, meaning to say, Kol mokum shenemar ha-mizbeach, anytime it says ha-mizbeach, with regards to any aspect of the Mizbeach, where it says ha-mizbeach, la'akev, that means that it is required. The Pasuk being quoted over here, the Pasuk says, V'yasisa es ha-mizbeach atzei shitim, chamesh amos orech, v'chamesh amos rochev, ravua yiyah ha-mizbeach, v'shalosh amos kol maso, it says ha-mizbeach by ravua, umin hadam yitin al karnos ha-mizbeach asher lefnei Hashem, asher be'ol moed, v'eskol adam yishboch el yisod mizbach ha'ola, asher pesach ol moed, and it also says, V'logach ha'koi midam ha'chatos betzbo, v'notzon al karnos mizbach ha'ola, v'eskol dama yishboch el yisod ha-mizbeach. So again, it uses the word mizbeach with regards to the keren, with regards to the yesod, with regards to the fact that it has to be square. And finally, with regards to the kevish, the ramp, the pasuk says, "V'zos Toras hamincha hakrev osab b'nei Aaron lefnei Hashem el pnei hamizbeach," which is a reference to the ramp. Rashi explains, "Shekol mokom shenemar hamizbeach la'akev." Anytime it says hamizbeach, it is a requirement. The hamizbeach mashma kishehu keinhu demikri mizbeach. The word mizbeach is understood that if it is made like this, then it's called a mizbeach. V'lo lo, and if not, it's not called a mizbeach. Uvekaren ksiv karnos hamizbeach. By the Karen it says karnos hamizbeach. Uviyesod ksiv el yesod hamizbeach. By the yesod it says el yesod hamizbeach. Uvekevesh ksiv el pnei hamizbeach. By the kevesh it says el pnei hamizbeach. V'hu hakevesh, that refers to the ramp. Shu ponav shel mizbeach, that's like the face of the mizbeach. She'olim lo derech sham, that's how they ascend to the mizbeach. Ki hechi dechashav tzad mizrachis pnei ol moed. It's the same way that the eastern side is considered the face of the ol moed. Machmas shah pesach sham, because the entrance is there. Uveribua ksiv, and also when it comes to being square, it's written ravua yeh hamizbeach. It says ravua yeh hamizbeach, and so again, those are all requirements. As long as it says hamizbeach, it means it's required. And the Gemara continues, Ela me'ata, but according to that, kior l'Rebbe, the kior according to Rebbe, the kior over here is not a reference to the basin, it's a reference to the engravings on the Mizbeach. The sovev l'Rebbe Yossi b'Rebbe Yehuda, and the sovev, which is the ledge of the Mizbeach, according to Rebbe Yossi b'Rebbe Yehuda, we should say, according to this logic, hachinami d'makev, we should say that these also are required, because it's written, v'nasata osa tachas karkov ha-Mizbeach l'mata, you're going to place it under the karkov of the Mizbeach beneath, v'tanya ezo karkov, and we learned in a brayso, what is this karkov? Rebbe Omer, zekior, Rebbe says this refers to the kior, the engravings, and it says the word ha-Mizbeach, that should be a requirement. And Rebbe Yossi b'Rebbe Yehuda Omer Zeh Sovev. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says this is the Sovev. So again, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, that should be a requirement. And the Gemara continues and says, yes, in fact, they are required. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, also Hayom, on that day, this is talking about on the day that they threw esrogim at one of the Kohanim who was tziduki. So it says, on that day, Nifkamo Karen Mizbeach, the corner of the Mizbeach, it was damaged. Vehiviu Bul Shel Melach, they brought some salt, Visasmu, they used this salt to be able to close it up, to fix the Karen HaMizbeach. V'lo mimnei shekasher le'avoda, not that made the Mizbeach now fit for the Avoda, ela shlo yira Mizbeach pagam, it's just that they didn't want the Mizbeach to look like it was damaged. Shekol Mizbeach she'ein lo keren v'kevesh v'yesod v'rivu apostle, because any Mizbeach without a corner, a ramp, a yesod, the base, the rivu, if it's not square, apostle, it's disqualified. And here we see Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Afa Sovev. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says also the Sovev, that is also a requirement. And Rashi explains, Elamayat, according to that, Kior l'Rebbe, again, the engravings, according to Rebbe, Dechsibuhu HaMizbeach, it says the word HaMizbeach, Hachanami Demakvi, it should be required, l'Rebbe, Mlawasat Siyurim, Shal Prachim, Betzitzim Uklam, if you don't make these designs, these engravings of flowers, other kinds of designs, Saviv l'Mizbeach, around the Mizbeach, Kemosaido v'Chayro, it's used here, the word Kior, again, means like an engraving, Zakior Siyurim, Saviv l'Mala Me'em So, refers to the engravings that are right above, from the middle of the Mizbeach. Also Hayom, and then it said in the Brisa, on that day, Shanisach Kohen Tzeduki, there was a Kohen who was a Tzeduki who did the libation, Me Hachag al Ragla, but he poured that libation, he poured that water from the holiday on his feet, to Regamu Kol Ha'am, and so all the people, they stoned him, Kedam Rinan Besukkah, like we say in Sukkah, they threw the Esrogim at him, Bol Shel Melach, Mole Egrov Shel Melach Shamati, Bol Shel Melach means a fistful of salt that they used in order to fix that corner of the Mizbeach, Lo Shekosher LaAvodas HaMizbeach, not that they made it okay to do Avodah on the Mizbeach, calls Mansha Karen Pogam, because if the Karen is damaged, that's a problem. Kedem Esayim V'Ozol shekol Mizbeach she'ein, like we're going to say, if the Mizbeach doesn't have a Karen, that's a problem. And then it said Afa Sovev, also the Sovev, Umid Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, from the fact that the Sovev is required according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Nishma Rabbi the Kior Ma'akev, we see according to Rabbi that the Kior, that the engravings are also required. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Ezo Karkov, what is the Karkov? Bein Karen leKaren Mokum Hilach Raglei HaKohanim. The Karkov was the area between the corners of the Mizbeach, the area where the Kohanim would walk. Amma, and it was the size of an Amma. The Gemara says, Atu HaKohanim ben Karen leKaren Hava Azli. Do you think the Kohanim walked between the corners? That's not true. Ela Ema, rather say as follows. Umokum hilach raglei HaKohanim Amma. There was the area of the Karkov, that's between the corners of the Mizbeach, and there was an additional area where the Kohanim would walk, that would be an Amma. But the Gemara says, how can you say the Karkov is on the top of the Mizbeach? But it's written in the Pasuk, Tachas Karkuvo Milmata Archetzio, under the Karkov, beneath until the midpoint. That sounds like we're talking about something that's along the side of the Mizbeach. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Trei Hava, there actually were two Karkovs, Chad Lanoi. One of them was just for beauty, that was on the side of the Mizbeach. V'chad l'kvanim delon ishtarku, and then there was also on the top of the Mizbeach, they had a design over there, so to speak, in order that the Kohanim wouldn't slip, they'd be able to walk without slipping. And the Gemara continues, Midas Arko, Midas Rachbo, Midas Komaso, Ein Ma'akvin. When it comes to the length and the width and the height, those are not required. Amar Rabbi Moni says, Uvilvad shelo yivchesenu mimizbeach she'asa Moshe. As long as it's not smaller, there's a minimum amount. They shouldn't be smaller than the Mizbeach that Moshe Rabbeinu made. V'cham, how much is that? Amar Rav Yosef says, Amma, it's one Amma. The Gemara says, Michkuala, the Gemara says they laughed when they heard an Amma. It can't be an Amma. The Pasuk says, Chamesh Amos Orech, V'chamesh Amos Rochev. It says that it was 5 Amos in length, 5 Amos in width. Ravua Yeh Mizbech, it should be a square, so how could you say 1 Amma? Amar le Abaya said to him, Dilma Mokom Ma'arocha Ka'amar Mar. Maybe what you're referring to as 1 Amma is the area of the Ma'arocha. That's where they set up the area of the fire that was on the Mizbeach. Amar Lei said to him, Mar de Gavra Rabbahu, the master, meaning you Abayu, who is a great person, Yada Maiko Amina, you understood what it was that I was saying. He understands what I'm saying. Kari Alayu, when he called about them, those who didn't understand what he was saying. And Rashi explains, Ezo Charkov, what's the Charkov? V'kasalka daitach Charkov de Krokoy. Initially, we think we're talking about the Charkov of the Pasuk. Then the Gemara is going to say, no, that the Pasuk is referring to what's at the side of the Mizbeach. And Rashi continues, Charkov Loshen Hekif Choretz Agula. The language, the word Charkov, it means that you surround it with a kind of an indentation. Bein Keren LeKeren, between the corners. Amma Rochev, it's an Amma wide. Shekeneged Bein Kronos, corresponding to between the corners. Haisa Amuko, Voletes, Govamat. Again, it was a little deep. It stuck out a little bit. Hayasaviv Law, Besvas HaMizbeach. That's what went around the Mizbeach. And Mokum Hilach Ragle HaKohanim Amma, where the Kohanim walked, was an Amma, Hashta Mashma, Vihi Haisa Amma, Shal Mokum Hilach. Right now the Gemara thinks it means that area between the corners was the Amma where the Kohanim walked. But then the Gemara said, Ato Kohanim Ben Karen LeKaren Hava Azli, did they really walk between the corners? V'halo Kashiagiu LeKaren HaKaren Ma'akvan Mehekif. What the Gemara means to say is that it can't be that they walked between the corners, because then when they would get to the corner, they would be blocked by the corner. So Elahachi Kamar Ben Karen LeKaren Umokam Hilach Ragle Kohanim, it means two different things. Between the corners, that's where you had these indentations, and then there was also an area next to it, one amma for where the Kohanim would walk. Min Choretz Amok Mimokam Hamarocha Misvas Hamizbeach Saviv. Again, you had like this indentation, Umakif Es Mokam Hamarocha, which surrounded the area of the Marocha, V'rachva Shal Choretz Shnei Amos, and the width of the Choretz was 2 amos, Amma Shal Ben Hakronos. It was 1 amma between the corners, V'Amma Shal Mokam Hilach, and then there was another amma where the Kohanim would walk. V'aksiv Gavi Michbar Maisei Reshes Nechosha Shenasnu Tachas Karkuva Milmata Ad Chetzio. Again, it talks about the Michbar, which was again this netting that was at the side of the Mizbeach under the Charkov. That sounds like it's at the side. Hekifu the Mizbeach Me'amtso Ulamal. It surrounded the Mizbeach from the midpoint and above. Lovush Kmin Hekif Shel Kvara. Again, it looked like a netting. V'uasei Nekavim Kekvara, like it looked like a bunch of holes. V'resha Shel Dogim, like the netting of of catching fish. Umagia Lamala Ad Mitachas Lekarkov Alma Bekir Mizbeach. So again, you see that therefore the Charkov was at the wall on the side of the Mizbeach. You wouldn't call the Michbar Tachas Karkuvo if the Karkuvo was not on the side. And so then the Gemara said, there were 2 of them. One was for the beauty, and one was that the Kohanim shouldn't slip. Let's say according to Rabbi Yossi, who says that it was 10 amos high, the Mizbeach, so then after, when you went up the wall, 6 amos, so then you had again this kind of indentation for beauty. V'zeu sovev, that was the sovev, v'kior, and that was the engravings. Defligu bei Rebbe v'Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yudalel, again that we had a machlokus between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yudalel, whether we're referring to the sovev or the engravings. Umitachas loso sovev, nosno ha-michbar, under that sovev, they had the michbar. That was the netting, the design of netting, v'rachvo magia, lamatar chatzi ha-mizbeach, and that made it all the way to the midpoint of the Mizbeach. Voya simen lahavdil ben hadamim holionim ladam hatachtonim. That midpoint was like the simen, that was the sign between, sometimes the blood was applied on the upper part of the Mizbeach, and sometimes on the lower part of the Mizbeach. Kedamin and Bezo Makoman mehikra Torah nasna mechitza, like we said in Ezo Makoman from this pasuk that the Torah gives like a mechitza that separates between the dam elyonim and the dam tachtonim. V'chad lekohanim delon ishtarko. Then you also had one for the kohanim that they shouldn't slip. Ulamala barosh hamizbeach hem miku sovev kamin charetz amok. Again, on the top of the Mizbeach, they had like an indentation, davar muat, a little bit, lioslam sfaso hekef ma'akakot and savish le'achliku, that allowed that there was a way that they wouldn't slip. Dilma moko ma'aracha kamar, then the Gemara said, maybe we're talking about the area of where the fire was, the Havayama, maybe that's what you mean, that it was an Amma. Shebein hakronos umakam hilach mematin bo amasayim l'chol tzad, because if you're going to have the area between the corners, plus the area where the Kohanim are walking, now you're already subtracting 2 Amos on every side. So pashlei amal Amma, all that remains is 1 Amma by 1 Amma for the Mokum of the Maracha, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Beis Amid Beis.